Here at Denton Peterson, we do a lot of work related to franchise law. We represent both franchisees and franchisors. And in our work with franchisors, we represent them with respect to preparing franchise disclosure documents and all the things that go into that, including often financial performance representations. Well, recently there's been a new commentary issued by the North American Securities Administrators Association. We call them NASA. In May 2017, they came out with a new commentary specifically related to financial performance representations. Essentially, they came out with new rules that franchisors will need to follow effective November 2017. So it's going to cover people basically beginning fiscal year 2018 for most franchisors. A little bit of background about NASA is probably in order. They were formed specifically to protect investors. They're heavily involved in franchise law, and they're heavily involved in creating the outlines for franchise disclosure documents. Of course, financial performance representations are part of a franchise disclosure document for a franchisor who chooses to disclose financial information to potential franchisees. Financial performance representations are a little bit special. They're particularly interesting to potential franchisees, and so there are a lot of specific rules about what can and cannot be disclosed in those financial performance representations. Essentially, franchisors have to be really careful about what go into those FPRs, or financial performance representations. Among the new rules that have come out that will be effective in November 2017 are a big long list, but some of the more important ones are, for example, there can be no blank pro formas in FDDs. That's been a common technique for some franchisors up till now. They say, well, we can't tell you how much you'll make, but here's an Excel spreadsheet that you can fill in whatever numbers you want. You got to be real careful about those under the new rules. First of all, they can never be part of an FDD. And second of all, the rules are very specific in pointing out that even a blank pro forma with some of the columns filled in can be advertising that's regulated by some of the registration states. So if you're doing blank pro formas for your potential franchisees, be really careful of that and talk to a knowledgeable franchise attorney. There are specific rules given about the difference between an average and median calculations, and careful disclosure that's required that has to be made so that the franchisee is not at risk of misunderstanding the numbers that you're giving them if you give them an average or a median number. The source of data for the financial performance representations has to be very clear. There are new rules about franchisor-operated outlets, whether they be company-owned, whether they be retaken from franchisees, and so forth, and you got to be careful how you disclose those. There are new rules about projections, what can and can't be the basis of the projections. For example, projections always have to be based on some actual historical data, and they have to be based upon the same opportunity that's going to be offered to the franchisee, which usually means it's going to have to be based on the same brand that's going to be offered to the franchisees. The rules on projections can be really complicated, and it bears looking into and talking to a knowledgeable franchise lawyer to make sure that you know that the projections that you're giving, if you're giving them, comply with the rules. There are also new rules regarding subsets. A lot of franchisors recently have been using different subsets of franchisees in the tables and charts that they use in their financial performance representations. There are new limits on what subsets can and can't be used. For example, there's a new rule saying that you can't disclose, for example, the performance of the top 10% of franchisees unless you also disclose the performance of the bottom 10% of franchisees. The idea the whole way through is to make sure that franchisees don't get an unrealistic expectation about what's going to happen if they buy the franchise. There are specific disclaimer provisions that talk about the disclaimer that has to be in place. In fact, the regulations get particularly ticky-tacky at times. For example, there's one disclaimer about historical performance and future projections that has to follow their exact language, and it's in its own paragraph, and it has to be in bold type. All of which makes sense because you figure that the franchisee is going to want to notice it. But then they say, well, you can't make it all caps, and you can't make it a larger font. So they want you to make it just the right size, just the right font, just the right text, and nothing different. And talking to an attorney who can let you know what those rules are can help prevent a franchisor from getting tripped up later on. The gist of the new rules is that franchisors really need to be careful when they're doing their financial performance representations. If you're going to do them, you need to make sure that they're done in a way that not only comply with the law, but that protect the franchisor from possible liability down the road. So beginning in 2018, make sure you've talked to a competent franchise lawyer who understands the new rules and can make sure you're protected.